Chapter 1. The Showcase and the Whisper of Legend. It is better not to begin with a debunking, but with silence. Picture a museum hall, where dim light falls on a solitary display case. Inside lies no relic of victory, no banner from the battlefield, no parade uniform. At the bottom of the glass box rests a jaw, heavy, mute, as if it had stepped out of a living face into the world of objects. This item always draws the eye, for it exposes to the public the most intimate part of a human being, the very thing usually hidden. In such boldness, there is a challenge. You look and involuntarily ask yourself, what was it like to live with such a burden every day? Every nation loves simple stories. They are handy like a pocket knife, useful, easy to remember, endlessly repeated. Washington has two legends that fit school books perfectly. The first is about the cherry tree. The young George allegedly confessed to a misdeed and thus proved his honesty. The second is about his wooden teeth, a symbol of endurance and simplicity. Both are short, both familiar, both like road fables told again and again. Yet the closer you step to the showcase, the harder it becomes to keep the legend from unraveling. Glass does not lie. Metal does not lie. Bone does not lie. Only words deceive when born from their context. To understand how the myth was born, we need to step back in time. In the 18th century, dentistry resembled craft more than medicine. A barber could at the same time be a dentist. His workshop smelled of hot metal, resin, and oil for tools. Sterility was more a feeling than a rule. To clean one's teeth meant using a brush with coarse bristles and a powder made of ash or crushed brick. The taste of sweetness was a symbol of wealth. Sugar and honey graced the tables of prosperous households. Wine and rum were part of daily culture and the army ration. All this slowly and relentlessly assaulted the teeth, making them loose and fragile. Pain became the constant background of the age. For young Washington, warning signs appeared too soon: sensitivity, bleeding, looseness. The next step was extraction. Imagine the procedure of that time: iron forceps, a sharp jerk, the taste of blood, a ringing in the head. In letters usually filled with dry reports of business appear brief, almost accidental remarks. Had to pull another one. No drama, just a matter of fact note. Pain here is not an event, but a backdrop, as familiar as rain outside the window. For an ordinary person, the mouth is a zone of private embarrassment. For a politician and a general, it is a tool of the trade. Any crack in speech, any unclear S or sh is instantly heard. And an orator without teeth sounds different, and often weaker. In such conditions, treatment of teeth was not even considered. They were simply replaced. Thus, dentures entered Washington's life. First crude metal frames, then complex contraptions with springs pressing the jaws together. And in those jaws, other people's teeth, bought on the market. Not by chance, living teeth looked more natural and lasted longer in the structure. They were sold by the poor, by soldiers, by debtors, sometimes by enslaved people. This is a dark but truthful facet of the era, reflecting its customs rather than condemning one individual. The tooth market then worked as plainly and dispassionately as the market for bread. Animal bone was also used. Density and whiteness were prized. Hippopotamus ivory, walrus tusk, occasionally elephant ivory. On paper, it sounded noble. In reality, the bone darkened, cracked, absorbed the stains of wine and tobacco. Over time, its surface came to resemble wood, matte, with grain-like striations. And here the legend found easy ground. Someone once said, like wood. And it was more convenient than a long explanation about hippopotamus ivory. A short formula always wins when it comes to the public imagination. Washington, being wealthy and disciplined, turned to the best craftsmen. Yet even their work remained torture. In his correspondence we read, "Better than before, holds but rubs, springs need loosening." Each new set was a compromise. The lighter the construction, the less stable. The stronger, the more painful. The more natural the appearance, the harder in daily life. Outwardly, this was perceived as iron self-control. Inwardly, it was merely the economy of pain. Thus personal necessity gradually became part of a public image. Chapter 2. An era where pain was the background. It would be a mistake to think Washington was an exception. In the 18th century, toothache accompanied almost everyone. It was not the misfortune of one man, but a general condition of society. A poor farmer, a merchant in the harbor, or an officer in uniform, each kept his own tally of lost teeth. So when we read about George's problems, it is important to remember, he did not suffer alone. He suffered along with his time. Let us step into daily life. Morning in the home of an average American did not begin with coffee and toothpaste, but with a coarse brush, at best with a bone handle and boar bristles. The bristles fell out in clumps, the handle cracked, and the sensation was like sweeping dry straw across your teeth. Powders were used, ash, charcoal, crushed brick. At first they seemed to clean, but in reality they scratched enamel, turning it into a soft sponge for bacteria. Each morning ritual was not a step toward health, but toward destruction. Diet only sped the processes. By then, sugar had become a symbol of prosperity. In wealthy homes it was displayed almost theatrically. A sugar loaf, molasses candies, each an attribute of status. Washington was no ascetic. He enjoyed sweets as well. Add to this honey eaten by the spoonful, and wine that accompanied nearly every meal, and you have a cocktail hostile to teeth. Alcohol irritated the gums, weakened tissues, and the wine's film only locked in decay. Military life struck its own blow. Campaigns lasted for months. Cold, rain, rations. Bread was hard, meat was salted, vegetables scarce. The absence of vitamins led to bleeding gums. Teeth loosened and fell out. Imagine an officer meant to inspire soldiers, yet he himself could only chew porridge and broth. Not from choice, but because solid foods tore at the inside of his mouth. Under such conditions, toothache was not an occasional episode, but a constant companion. What did this mean for Washington? His letters are full of hints of torment. Short phrases about unbearable pain, about forced extraction, about having to seek another dentist yet again. And all this stood alongside affairs of state, plans for military campaigns, discussions of land and taxes. His life was divided into two lines: the official, dry, dignified, and the unofficial, full of chronic pain that could not be shown to the public. Here, an important thought emerges of Iris. At the time, pain was not considered something to be hidden in letters, yet it was not turned into drama either. It was everyday life. People simply grew accustomed to living with it. Pain was like the sound of a river you hear each day. It does not stop you from speaking unless it grows too loud. For Washington, that sound never ceased. And against this backdrop, his restraint, his severity, his manner of carrying himself were formed. Let us add another dimension: social expectation. Society valued not only the strength of hands or clarity of mind, but also physical appearance. A smile, teeth, posture, all were part of reputation. A peasant could hide a toothless mouth with his hand, but a leader, a general, a politician, had no right to appear sickly. In this lay both tragedy and greatness. For every time he faced the people, he donned not only his uniform, but also a mechanical mask of metal and other people's teeth. A mask that cut into his gums, yet preserved the appearance. And so it becomes clear. The era of pain is not a poetic metaphor, but a precise description. It was a time when almost no one had healthy teeth by the age of 40. A time when dentistry harmed more than it healed, and a time when Washington had to not only endure, but lead others. If today it seems strange that among all his stories, the one about his teeth clung most tightly, people of his era would have found the opposite strange. For them, teeth were a matter far more pressing than for us. And the myth of wooden teeth was only an attempt to simplify a conversation about what was, for everyone, a painful reality. Chapter 3. How his dentures were actually made. A glance into the dentist's workshop of that era shatters any illusion. There was no sterile whiteness, no snowy smiles. What met the eye was a table scattered with metal arches, pins, bits of wire, bone plates, and little boxes filled with other people's teeth. This was not the laboratory of the future, but a craftsman's shop where each new device was a compromise between appearance and endurance. The constructions began with the frame. Gold, copper, and sometimes lead, soft and heavy, were commonly used. From these plates, the base was cut and shaped to fit the jaw. Into it, teeth were fixed, real ones, pulled from someone else's mouth or carved from hippopotamus ivory. The wealthiest ordered fresh teeth from practitioners, as they looked the most natural. Nobody at the time spoke of donation in our sense. Teeth were merchandise, and the price depended on age and condition. The president's smile might well have been assembled from fragments of lives belonging to those who had no right of choice. Equally important were the springs. 2 plates were connected by a spiral that forced the upper and lower jaws together. In practice, this meant constant pressure. Springs snapped open while speaking. Eating became torment. And if the device shifted, he could bite his tongue or cheek so painfully, the ache lingered for hours. These details were seldom spoken of openly, yet they turned Washington's daily life into an obstacle course. His correspondence with dentists shows both restraint and honesty. He thanked them for their skill, but admitted, "It holds, but rubs. Better than before, but painful. The spring should be loosened." Each new denture was a step forward and a step back at once. The sturdier the frame, the heavier the device. The denser the material, the greater the friction. The more natural the look, the louder the grinding inside the mouth. Dentures did not solve the problem. They only changed its form. There was also an ethical edge. In bills of the period, teeth bought from enslaved people are mentioned. It is a grim fact, but it could hardly have been otherwise. In an economy where a human being could be treated as property, teeth became property too. This was not the fault of one particular patient, but the logic of the system itself, and it casts a shadow that cannot be avoided. We are used to thinking of a smile as a sign of closeness and trust. In Washington's case, had he ever bared his teeth, that smile might have carried another person's fate. Nor should we forget the visual effect. Materials aged, bone darkened, cracked, absorbed the stains of wine and tobacco. On the surface appeared striations reminiscent of wooden grain. If someone once called them wooden, it was no madness. The eye really saw what was easier to explain with the word wood. But here lies the difference between myth and truth. For myth, the metaphor is enough. For truth, the specifics matter. Metal, bustizo, springs, human teeth. And together, unending pain. It was precisely these dentures that shaped what we now call Washington's manner. His speech grew shorter, his pauses more frequent, his smiles rarer. What appeared as iron self-control was born of iron in the mouth. Only he and his dentists knew the real reason. Society saw something else: strength, seriousness, dignity. The mechanics hid behind the image, and the image grew stronger because of the mechanics. Chapter 4. How pain became style, and style became a symbol. It is hard to imagine that a mechanical device in the mouth could shape a person's character, but that is exactly what happened with Washington. His dentures dictated the rhythm of his speech, forced him to economize the movements of lips and tongue, and this enforced restraint gradually came to be perceived as a virtue. Contemporaries often noted that he spoke little, and always to the point. His remarks were short, weighty, punctuated with long pauses, theses. To soldiers and colleagues, this looked like indiscipline. In truth, every word demanded effort. An extra phrase meant an extra snap of the springs and another wave of pain. Thus frugality became style, and the style became a mark of strength. Gestures and gaze played no less a role. Where another politician might ease the tension with a smile, Washington chose a silent, steady look. His eyes did the work that his lips could not. As a result, those around him perceived him as a man fully in control of himself and the situation. Though at the root of this effacey composure lay the desire to conceal physical discomfort. Artists unwittingly fixed this image. In formal portraits, the president appears composed, serious, his lips pressed into a thin line. A broad smile is nowhere to be found. Viewers saw greatness in this, but the reason was much simpler. A wide smile would have betrayed the contraption, and no leader of a young republic could risk that exposure. Newspapers and teachers only reinforced the effect. Pedagogy thrived on simple formulas. Washington was honest because he confessed to cutting down the cherry tree. Washington was steadfast because he wore wooden teeth. Both stories turned private pain and private necessity into moralizing parables. The inconveniences of everyday life disappeared, yielding to a symbol that could be retold in 3 words. Over time, this very symbol became the foundation of the Washington style. Stoicism, composure, the ability to remain silent and to restrain emotion came to be seen as the standard of leadership. And a few paused to consider that beneath it lay not an innate character, but a constant struggle with metal and bone in the mouth. A personal drama gradually turned into national iconography. Chapter 5. Museum versus Myth. Wooden or not? The end of this story begins where we first started, in the museum. Beneath the glass lie George Washington's dentures. They look nothing like the legend imagined. No wood. Before us are heavy metal frames, springs, inserts of bone and human teeth. On the label, the craftsman's name, dates of manufacture, notes on the materials used. Everything is specific and tangible. A legend collapses when confronted by an object you can actually see. The exhibit leaves a strange impression. There is no beauty in it, no heroic glow, but there is truth. Darkened bone, signs of wear, chips on the surface, all silent evidence of the pain endured by a man who became a national symbol. And that silence speaks louder than any words. For the object does not try to please. It simply lies there, disproving comfortable stories by its very existence. Here, a vital lesson emerges. Legends last only as long as no one looks directly at the facts. But once the museum placed the dentures on display, the myth of wooden teeth ceased to be truth and became instead a cultural symptom. We began to understand why people wanted to simplify a complicated story. Wood sounds more familiar than hippopotamus ivory, metal plates, and other people's teeth. Yet it is precisely this contrast between tale and reality that makes the story genuinely compelling. One should not think the myth has vanished without a trace. It continues to be repeated in jokes, in classroom retellings, in popular books. It lives alongside the truth, like a shadow beside an object. But now we know how it arose, and we see. It was not deception, but a metaphor that once helped adults and children talk about something otherwise too unpleasant to discuss. The legend became a draft, and the final version lies under glass. This collision of myth and reality makes Washington's figure more complex and more interesting. He remains a hero, but a hero with human pain, compromise, diseases, and the awkwardness he concealed behind an image. His greatness lay not in wooden teeth, but in the fact that he led a nation despite daily torment. And when we look today at those dentures, we do not see disgrace but testimony to strength. For greatness is not a shining smile on a portrait, but the ability to work and prevail even when you are in pain. It is precisely this conclusion the museum gives back to the visitor. The myth of wooden teeth becomes part of cultural background, while the truth of heavy dentures becomes part of a human biography. And perhaps that is better. Legends teach simple morals, but truth teaches respect. Respect for labor, for endurance, and for the unseen efforts from which history is woven.